Pues bien, cerramos el día de hoy con la conferencia Actualización de semiconductores discretos de Toshiba a cargo de Jay Heineke, vicepresidente de la Unidad de Negocio Discreto y de Materiales y Dispositivos en Toshiba, donde ha colaborado durante 8 años. Jay tiene una amplia experiencia en marketing y ventas internacionales en la industria de electrónica. La cartera de clientes incluye fabricantes de equipos originales de Fortune 100, 5 distribuidores mundiales importantes, 2 revendedores de valor agregado, 14 empresas de representantes de América del Norte y 2 empresas de representantes de América del Sur. Tiene amplia experiencia con una cartera de semiconductores de potencia, dispositivos de pequeña señal, dispositivos optoelectrónicos, microondas y cartera de materiales y dispositivos con cabezales de impresión técnica, magnetrones, entre otros. Previo a iniciar la conferencia de Jay, solo recordarles que del lado derecho de su pantalla podrán visualizar un panel donde estamos interactuando en cada una de las conferencias y la dinámica para esta sesión es dar respuesta a la pregunta ¿en qué nivel ha impactado la situación mundial de la industria de semiconductores a tu organización? Los invitamos a participar y agradecer de antemano el habernos acompañado en estos 2 días de conferencias e invitarlos a participar el día de mañana en el encuentro de negocios donde podemos tener diferentes relaciones cliente-proveedor o alianzas de negocios. Todo esto relacionado con temas de tecnología. Doy paso en este momento a Jay para iniciar nuestra charla. Disfrutemos esta sesión. Adelante, Jay.
Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jay Heineke, and I work for Toshiba America Electronic Components, and I am honored to be here with you today to share a little bit about at least Toshiba's view on the semiconductor market, and obviously share with you Toshiba's business. But I'd like to thank Alex Nava for inviting me to participate in this event. It is truly an honor, and I have known Alex for, I don't know, 15, 20 years now, and he's a good friend. And obviously we want to grow our business in Mexico, and anything I can do to help him, obviously we want to move together. So with that, what I'd like to start with is a little bit as far as the table of contents. And what I'd like to first talk about is not everyone knows about Toshiba, even though I've been with Toshiba roughly 34 years, and I always think everyone knows about Toshiba, but in fact, that's not always a good assumption. So I want to share with you a little bit about Toshiba and also about Toshiba Electronic Devices and Storage, which we call TDSC. And then after you get an understanding of who the company is, I want to share with you a little bit about the products, obviously about the semiconductor markets and the applications that we participate in. And then what are we doing as a company to help address these unusual times in the market? And then why Toshiba? Why would you want to be participating with Toshiba down in Mexico? And I'm hoping that I can address all those questions with what I'm going to present to you in the next few minutes. So the first thing to start out is who is Toshiba and who is TDSC? And not to bore you with typical org charts, but I think it is important to know that Toshiba, which is about a $33 billion conglomerate, is broken up into 4 different sections. And if you start on the right-hand side, it starts out with energy, ICT solutions, and infrastructure. And finally, what I think is the crown jewel of Toshiba is the Electron Device and Storage Group. And when you break down by revenue, out of the roughly $32 to $33 billion on the left-hand side, by the way, this is in yen, so excuse me, I'm doing the conversion for you. Out of the roughly $33 billion in sales, the Electron Device and Storage Group represents about $8 billion. And then on the right-hand side, you'll notice that there's an operating income and a return on sales perspective. And the corporation, we're forecasting for all of fiscal year 2021, which ends in March of 22, we're anticipating about $1.7 billion in operating income, of which the Electron Device and Storage Groups can represent about $550 million of it. So to put all that in perspective, I think this is a tremendous chart. We're roughly 24% of the Toshiba corporate revenue and about 32% of the operating income. And you may recall in the previous slide that from an ROS perspective, the company is around 5%, and the electron device and storage group is in excess of 7%. So we're exceeding the company expectations, and more importantly, we continue to grow and contribute to the organization. So the next is, well, where do we service? What parts of the world do we service? Obviously, we're a Japan-based company. Our headquarters is currently in Tokyo, moving down to Kawasaki, but from a global support system, and obviously you've got a lot of global customers down in Mexico. On the right, you'll notice up in the far right-hand corner, it's Toshiba America Electronic Components. Our charter is to support all the Americas, North America and South America, and obviously Central America as well. And within that region, we have a variety of people, and we'll give you this moving forward so you have the contact names if you so desire to have them. And more importantly, for the North America segment, we have roughly 12 to 14 different rep companies that we deal with. But more importantly for Mexico, as I already talked about, Alex Nava, BP Electronica is our partner and representative down in the Mexico market. And as I also alluded to, they have been with us a very long time. They are an outstanding rep. And if you haven't dealt with them yet, please do so at your earliest convenience. And as far as how we go to market for distribution, we have Aero, Avnet, and TTI as our major distributor partners, as well as we have DigiKey and Mouser for our catalog, so-called catalog house partners who do a lot of our new product introductions. Actually, all 5 of them can do new product introductions, but DigiKey and Mouser, it's their specialty. In any case, obviously readily available in your market space. So next, what are the products that TDSC actually offers? This is an oversimplification of, or I should say, a macro view of what we offer. We've got the discrete semiconductors on the left. We've got the system devices or system LSI products on the right. And then in the middle, we've got storage products, primarily hard disk drives. And if you break it down even further within the Toshiba semiconductor portfolio, on the right-hand side, you'll notice the system devices, which includes MCUs, digital devices, analog devices, and sensors. The discrete world, which is actually where I reside, is actually composed of small signal devices, power, high power, and what we call opto devices. Actually, we should reclassify that to be isolation because it's opto isolation and digital isolation. But in any case, a whole litany of different part types and product offerings that are available into the Mexico market. And this is a very, very busy chart. And as I already showed on the previous page, the portfolio. But to put it all in perspective, we ship roughly 2 billion pieces a month, about 37,000 SKUs. And as far as the discrete market share is concerned, we're number 3 in the world. And what's probably the most relevant is you'll notice in the middle, it talks about the sales ratio, item versus application. If you look a little bit on the left, you notice that we've got opto, power, and small signal, but power is really the key driver of our business. It's roughly over 50% of our revenue offering and a big part of what our future investments are. But more importantly to our Mexico customers, we are highly, highly focused on the industrial and the automotive space, which is very consistent with a lot of the business that we have in Mexico today. And we believe it also will be something going forward in the future. Once again, going to the next slide, we're talking a little bit more about the discrete business. And this is a way too much information for this particular audience, but I will gloss over some of the key elements. In the small signal device space, we have a lot of power management devices, protection devices, signal conditioning devices, and RF. And then power, which I mentioned before, is mission critical for us. We've got what we call LVMOS or low voltage MOSFETs, is basically 200 volts and down. And then we've got the high voltage, which is basically from 200 to 900 volt. And then what we classify as high power, which exceeds 900 volt. But big business in MOSFETs and diodes and intelligent power devices. So it is an up and coming part of our business, not even to mention silicon carbide and gallium nitride moving forward. And then on the opto device side, or I should say isolation side, a whole litany of different products. And I'll share a little bit more with you later on the strategy. As a matter of fact, this is the strategy for small signal. I just want to highlight if you need product for Mexico, what would you want to get? What are the key? What is Toshiba really good at? And for small signal, I think our small signal FETs are truly outstanding. Granted, I'm incredibly biased, but I think we've got a tremendous lineup. And then analog ICs, probably one of the things that's interesting now with this unusual market condition is a lot of our competitors are having some issues with analog ICs. And we believe that our low dropout regular ICs, load switch ICs, and eFuse are really tremendous and can highly compete in that space. And of course, we do have diodes and logic as well. This is, once again, a moderately busy chart. And what I really like for you to focus on is the left-hand side. You'll notice within this graph, you have a CAGR growth on the left, and you've got market share on the bottom of the scale. And what is really the key items when you look at the focus areas, high voltage, which in this case is super junction technology, we call it DT MOS, is a big area of business for us, high growth, and we expect to be highly successful in that space. But more importantly, when I think about the Mexico market, I think about our low voltage business. I think we have very, very compelling products, not only in the non-automotive space, but also in the automotive space, which once again, I think lends itself exceedingly well to your customer base. We also have high voltage FETs and planar technology, but it's just, we believe in the entire menu, we have something to offer you. And then if you look a little bit towards the upper left, you'll notice new entry. We've got silicon carbide, which is rolling out. We've had silicon carbide diodes today, but we are going to have silicon carbide MOSFETs by the end of this year. And then gallium nitride is another new and upcoming technology that is going to lend itself into the MOSFET world. So we believe this is an incredibly exciting time within the power business. And of course, we need to invest wisely since no one has infinite resources, not only in the silicon side, but also in the compound semiconductor side. So the next slide is the strategy for isolation. If you look at this particular chart, you'll notice on the bottom, we've got triac couplers and transistor couplers. They're basically the foundation or the meat and potatoes type of business that we have. And in many respects, Toshiba is incredibly well known for those two type of products. But as far as what the industry or the market is requiring, it's more and more going towards IC couplers, photorelays, and automotive couplers, and not to mention digital isolation. Those are the truly hot spots within the market that we think we provide solutions that can help your customer base. So where is the market going? Well, as I mentioned, I've been in this business for a long, long time, and haven't seen anything quite like what we're experiencing today. And I'll just give you, kind of our take on the situation on what's transpiring. So first of all, this is a kind of an interesting chart. The source of the data is from Gartner, and you look at the CAGR for semiconductors, and you're saying, well, 3.7%. That's not particularly huge growth. Everything you read in the Wall Street and other articles about how semiconductors are just booming. Well, actually, if you look at from 20 to 21, overall, the market grew at almost 27%. I mean, it was just phenomenal out-of-sight growth. And then for non-memory related products, in other words, the discrete world, you're talking about a 24% jump. Obviously, that is not sustainable within the market. We do anticipate the market settling down a bit, and from 21 to 25 to be growing at a more, I don't want to say normal, but somewhat normal rate of growth, about 3.5% for the discrete business. So the next slide is about where the market is by area. And this isn't necessarily shocking news for anyone who's been in this business for some period of time. Back in 2010, if you look over on the left, 55% of the consumption was either China, Taiwan, or what we call the APAC area, and for manufacturing. And the Americas was 15%. Obviously, more and more was going to lower cost solutions overseas. And by 2020, on the right-hand side, it's now almost 64%. It's a 9% increase. You could say, well, the Americas grew from 15 to 18, which is good news. Obviously, it's good news for Mexico as well. but it's not growing at the same rate as what's happening over in Asia. And I think that's one of the reasons why the USMCA was being launched by US legislation, which is going to change the dynamics of doing business. And you could say, well, it's just a revision on the NAFTA agreement. Well, yeah, but I think for semiconductors, it's much, much more serious than that. And it'll be interesting when we look back in history, what is going to transpire and how this may or may not shift how some of this manufacturing can be done. It might be a tremendous boom for the Mexico marketplace. And we're hoping it is going to be that way. So in reference to applications, so I gave you a summary of the macro view of overall semiconductor. Now, if you break it down into what's we're really focused on, which you may recall, I talked about the industrial and automotive space. Well, if you look down on the bottom portion of the orange, this particular area from 2021 to 2025, once again, this is from Gartner, is roughly a 7.1% CAGR. And this is a big area of focus for Toshiba. So therefore, I think it's going to be, tremendous growth for Mexico and tremendous growth for us. We have a product portfolio that fits that space, and it's an aggressively growing market. So it could be a win-win for everyone. And then finally, as far as you take the same information and you break it down by product type, not to belabor the point on MOSFETs, but the big blue section is you can tell that power MOSFETs or power transistors are the biggest area for growth overall within the next 5 years. It's well in excess of exceeding the market in excess of 8+%. So this is where Toshiba is beamed in on as far as where we're investing our money. And this chart, and this is a way oversimplification of what's transpiring in the market, but I think it brings a good point forward, and that is if you look at the sunshine, right? So servers, notebook PCs, automotive, e-tools, power supplies, and home automation, which includes air conditioning. They're all sunshine. In other words, they are all red hot. Now, as I mentioned, I've been in this business for a long time. It is very, very unusual. Matter of fact, I can't even recall a time when every single market at the same time is growing dramatically. And we have hit, like you could say, it's almost a perfect storm where the markets just decided it's to be like a tsunami and all hit at the same time. Now, some of the interesting things that have transpired is if we look at 21B, which is October through March, this coming up, there are some signs, and I'm saying signs, of some potential softening. So server market is starting to show a little bit. Notebook PCs, as the work from home situation starts to change and offices start to open up again, that is starting to show signs of slowing down a little bit. Power supplies also a little bit, and a home automation also a little bit, because obviously the do-it-yourselfers are going back to the office, so they're not necessarily fixing up their home all the time. In any case, I think it's interesting that things are starting to, I don't want to say go back to normal, but they're most certainly small tidbits of signs indicating the market's starting to shift back a little bit. Matter of fact, if you look up in the upper right-hand corner, you'll notice the book-to-bill ratio. 6 months ago, the book-to-bill ratio was 2-to-1. And now, as we get into October, the book-to-bill ratio is 1.5. Well, it's still obviously a very aggressive book-to-bill, but think about it. If it was 2.0, that makes total sense. Lead time's almost doubled. Of course, your book-to-bill ratio is going to double. And then your lead times continue to kind of slowly increase, but your book-to-bill actually decreased. Matter of fact, you're actually at a decelerating rate of bookings, which, as I mentioned before, is another small sign of things. I don't want to say softening because that would be inappropriate, but getting slightly better than they have been. And now, granted, don't misunderstand. We're still going to be tight over the next 6 months for semiconductor supply, and but there are signs that a year from now we could be having an entirely different conversation on what's transpired in the industry. So the next slide is talking about lead times, and I mean, if you're out there buying semiconductors, you are well aware that lead times have gotten crazy. Matter of fact, you don't even need to be in the industry. You can pick up the Wall Street Journal and read about what's happening as far as semiconductors are concerned. But I think it's interesting to note that, typical lead time when things are normal is roughly 12 weeks or so. And then for us in January, we increased, you'll notice on this particular slide, you've got power MOSFETs, small signal, diodes, and opto, basically our four business groups within semiconductor, or discrete semiconductor, I should say. And it went from basically 12 weeks. And so in January, we moved it to 20, 21 weeks, depending on the product type. And then we had it shifted again in June and increase it slightly more by 3 or 4 weeks on each product type. And then once again in October, we had to shift. So now you've gone from basically 21 weeks to about 25 or beyond, depending on the product type. Now, granted, this is all based on which package and which parts and which factory and whatnot. So these are all basically averages. But it is no doubt that things have not gotten significantly better in the short term, even though I alluded to the fact that you get decelerating bookings. But your lead times continue to extend. So it seems a little bit of a dichotomy there. But there is no doubt that the factories are trying to do everything they can to optimize to meet all this demand. But I think that this may start to change in the not too distant future. So the next slide is talking a little bit about Malaysia and the COVID situation. Now, I found this to be quite fascinating. This is kind of an interesting map. And you look at all of the different semiconductor companies and manufacturing that's going on in Malaysia. Now, for those of you, many of you may know this already, that it's kind of phenomenal how many of our competitors are there, including us, our partners, Amkor Technology in Kuala Lumpur. And this country started in the July timeframe. The government did this COVID mandate and started shutting things down. Now, different parts of the country were impacted more aggressively than others. Matter of fact, we were very fortunate that Amkor could continue to stay up and running in July, and then they implemented another government shutdown into August, September. So it's been a rough road, and obviously, once again, you can read all about this. This is not shocking news, but it is interesting how all these different companies have been impacted and the ripple effect it had on the entire industry. And it wasn't just the companies themselves that were impacted. I mean, think about all of the sub components that support to make semiconductors, right? Whether it's your resins or your copper, your gold, whatever. All of those sites were also impacted by some of these shutdowns. And so therefore, the ripple effect was incredibly dramatic. And obviously, as we get into the October timeframe, things are starting to slowly improve in this space. And so thus, once again, you've got a little bit more capacity coming online that will help relieve a little bit of this tension going forward. So what are we doing as a company to address this market? So here you have, you've got increasing demand that's just off the hook. You've got a supply chain issue as far as logistics is concerned that's challenging things. You've got inconsistencies in your manufacturing due to shutdowns and whatnot. And obviously, you've got some inflationary issues that are now starting to occur that you can read about also in the newspaper. But what is Toshiba doing as a company to help address all the dynamics that are happening at this point in time? So the first thing is, and once again, this is out of our earnings, which we published last week, I believe, on November 12th. And within that, it shows that the corporation is going to spend about $1.8 billion in CapEx. And out of that, the Electronic Device and Storage Solutions Group is going to get about $640 million of it. And as a discrete person, I am so excited about this because they're investing so aggressively in our product offering that it's really kind of amazing and very impressive. And let me give you more detail on that. So the next slide talks about the CapEx for TDSC that is broken down for semiconductors, HDD, and others. The area of interest for this particular discussion is the discrete semiconductor. Our Kaga fab is expanding an 8-inch and 12-inch on the front end, And then for our Himeji facility on the front end, we're doing silicon carbide 6-inch wafers, so we're expanding capacity. And granted, it takes time to make that happen, but it is most certainly being aggressively pursued. And I'll show you something in just a second on a press release that we just had. And then on the R&D side, as I mentioned before, we're about an $8 billion group, and we're spending almost $500 million in R&D. So about 6% of our money goes back in R&D. And once again, for discretes, heavily invested into MOSFETs, silicon carbide, and gallium nitride, and some other things. So for having new product development and new product offerings for your customer base going forward, the future looks incredibly bright. It really, really does. So next is discrete fabs and the sites. You can look at this at your leisure, but I do want to highlight that our Himeji facility does have the silicon carbide product, and our Kaga facility will have the 12-inch. Matter of fact, we had a press release on March 10th about the 12-inch line on the front end happening, and that we'll have mass production in the first half of fiscal year 2023. Now, we've had 12-inch in the past for our system LSI group. This is the first time for our discrete group. And obviously, if we're expanding capacity like this with 12-inch, we got to fill the fab come 2023, which means we need to aggressively pursue the Mexico customer base to help fill the fab. So once again, probably a pretty good marriage between our two interests. The next slide is talks about our multi-production structure. And the reason I put this in here is not to show you necessarily what our business continuity plan is, even though we obviously have one, and Toshiba's had a lot of experience with, Thailand floods and earthquakes in Japan, of actually executing to this, where we have redundancies built in. So you'll notice on the left, you've got front end fab capability. There's redundancy. One factory can build what the other one can if something happens. And then on the back end, you'll notice we've got our Japan operations versus our overseas operations, along with our outsourcing partners. So we've got enough redundancies where typically, if there is an issue somewhere, we've got a backup solution to keep your customers' lines up and running. But this is a great story under normal conditions. Unfortunately, today, things aren't normal. We have a situation where all the factories are full. So the multi-production structure, even though under normal conditions is a tremendous asset, today it doesn't solve all the problems that we currently have as far as supply versus demand scenario. But it is something that your customer base does need to know, especially if you're in the super sensitive business, such as I mentioned before, the automotive space. So why Toshiba? And this is a summary of everything that I've talked about so far. It really is, as I mentioned before about Alex Nava and BP Electronica, we have a very strong interest in Mexico. And I think Mexico, because of what you build in your space in the industrial and the automotive area, we have a very, and you can throw in communications as well, we have a very good match of what we offer versus what Mexico needs. The next issue is we're expanding capacity aggressively. We've got a 12-inch fab we need to fill. Therefore, we need Mexico's business worse than ever as we move forward into the future. And number three, as I mentioned before, and not to get in the political space, but this USMCA agreement and the interest of trying to move manufacturing back into the Americas, I think could be a tremendous boom for Mexico. And obviously, if that in fact happens, you're going to need more semiconductor supply. And I think Toshiba can bring you stable supply. So it could be a very good partnership per se. And with that, I believe the last point that I do want to make is the last slide, which is if you do need to contact someone relative to Toshiba's product offering or want to talk further about what's transpiring in the market and what we can do together to grow our business together, BP Electronica can help address that. There are 4 locations in the Mexico area. The addresses and phone numbers are included in this presentation, so please feel free to contact BP/Toshiba, and we will most certainly do our best to address your needs. With that, thank you so much for spending time with me. I hope you have a great day, and once again, things will get better in the future. Take care. Have a great day.